Ladies and gents, welcome back to the YouTube channel. We have yet another restoration on our hands. However, this one is a little bit different. Rather than try and make a watch look brand new, we're just trying to get this watch up and running. Now, huge thank you to James. James actually watches this channel. He reached out to me, he said, "Hey Peter, we're pretty local. This is what I have. Here's the story." And I was all ears. I was so ready for this watch. This is actually one of the oldest watches that I have serviced thus far. This watch comes in at a whopping 1964 year of production. Now it's a reference 1007, and let me tell you guys, there's nothing but sentimental value behind this watch. Now when it first came in, it's been in the family since it was purchased brand new, and this guy wore it. He loved it, but it's not in horrible condition cosmetically. Mechanically, that's a completely different ballgame, and we're going to jump into that a little bit further on. Now, I'm just checking everything, checking all the functionality. To wind it, it's extremely tight. The seconds hand won't run. And I mean, all other functions, everything just feels gummed up. Now, for this video, I actually tried out a few different camera angles, trying to give you guys a little bit better of an experience. So let me know in the comments down below how you like it. Now, I also want to point out there was a fuzz left on the lens. I don't know. I didn't catch it up until I edited this video, but it's there. All right, so we're removing the bracelet here, and one side needed to be popped out. The pins were pretty seized. However, this one, the pin was already hanging out. All I had to do was push down a little bit on it, and the bracelet came right off. So I guess we're off to a good start. Now, first and foremost, this is a 60-year-old watch. Actually, I'm sorry, more than 60 years old. Let me do the math here, all right, guys? I'm not a mathematician. Hold on. Give me a few seconds. Continue watching the video. Hold on. Oh shit, I'm actually right. Okay, it's actually 60 years old exactly. All right, 60-year-old watch. So 1 million serial, reference 1007 once again. This is a time-only complication watch, and once again, cosmetically, I think it's in phenomenal condition. Now, we have the original engine-turned bezel. We have the original plexi crystal, and I mean, in this case, it's not bad. It's not horrible. There are some minor scratches, but no serious deep dings, dents, etc. Nothing like that. So, I mean, that's a great thing, especially a watch this old. Now, I always check before I disassemble, right? I want to see if there's any hidden damages that I can make note of before I even take this thing apart. So I want to take a good look at the dial, look at the state of the hands, all of the markers, crystal, bezel, case, etc., etc. If there's any other serious damage, we'll catch it later on down the line. Now, our bracelet. So this is actually pretty cool, okay? This is a Jubilee bracelet, the older folded style link ones. And once again, we're going to check our date code here. Everything seems to be period correct. But our inner clasp blade, if you guys will notice, it's stamped Rolex, it's stamped stainless steel, but we have a USA insignia. Shout out to America, all right? Shout out to all our boys in blue and serving overseas. Come on, guys. But this is pretty cool, right? So even to this day, it's actually pretty expensive to import stainless steel. I don't know why. Don't ask me. I don't know the tariff laws. I don't know any of that. But this is a Jubilee bracelet that was created in the USA for Rolex. Why? Because it was cheaper to do it that way. As crazy as it sounds. So now we're moving over. We're going to remove this case back. Goes right in the case back jig, tightening the case down, making sure that everything is stable. And then we could go ahead and loosen it. These tools are great and make sure that you don't skip over the teeth of the case back and actually scratch the case back. So now we can go ahead and remove it and uncover this movement. Now, at first glance, it doesn't look too bad under here. However, I want to take a closer look at this case back, all right? Let's jump into this gasket and why this watch is not waterproof. All right, this thing felt like a piece of concrete, did not feel like rubber at all. And I mean, it's completely fused to the case back. This is why replacing gaskets, especially ones on the case back that ensure waterproofness, are so crucial. Look at this thing. I mean, it's no longer rubber, all right? Now, moving on to the actual movement itself, this oscillating weight is extremely hard to turn. And I mean, there's still a piece of gasket coming out of here. But the biggest thing for me, I want to see this balance. Now, as you guys saw, I blew some air on it and it's not moving. We're going to jump into why this has happened a little bit later on. But this is not a good sign, especially right off the bat. We're going to have a serious issue on our hands, and I'll explain a little bit deeper. But I'm just inspecting everything before I take it apart. There's no oil left in this movement. It's like the Mojave Desert in there. It's completely dry. So we're going to loosen our detent screw and actually remove the crown. Now, somebody was asking about these parts trays. I don't remember where I got them. I bought them at a show. I don't even know how long ago. but they're great. They keep all the parts nice and safe. We're going to continue along with the disassembly of this movement. Remove the automatic module screws. Now, you'll know these because they are blued, so you can't really lose them. Then we remove the automatic module itself, place that out nicely, and then we're going to continue disassembling. We need to move in these brittle screws so that we can actually remove the movement from the mid case. It was a little bit stuck in there, but a few taps later, and we got the movement out. Now the movement's in a movement holder. We can go ahead and line these hands up. We want to make sure that they are perfectly within line so we can actually remove these hands. However, I had a problem with the hands. Somebody completely jammed them down onto the cannon pinion, hour wheel, whatever. So I had to use a different means of method to get these hands off. I never really used these version dial protectors. They don't really work that well, and honestly they scratch dials, but in some cases you do need them, all right, to protect the actual dial underneath it. So now we're removing the screws that hold on the dial. Then we can go ahead and actually lift the dial off the movement, and we get our first look at this watch topside. Now nothing jumps out, nothing right off the bat, except all of the bridges are completely stuck to this movement. We remove the balance bridge screw. Now we're removing the balance end bridge. Now, you guys are seeing me. I'm putting it on the post here, and I never leave a balance like this. I always have something underneath it to support it, but I'm looking for the concentric lines of the wheel. And this is why I always say looks can be very deceiving. Once this thing's under the microscope, you can clearly see the uneven spacing, all the bends, all the kinks in this hairspring. This will not be able to be reutilized. There's just absolutely no way. So moving along, we're going to remove all the remaining power in this movement, pull back on the click, and then release the mainspring wind. Now moving along, we can remove this seconds wheel cover. This is just like a little brass fitting that stays over that seconds wheel and leaves it in. Now removing this wheel, these are special pliers that allow it to get underneath that wheel, and as you guys just saw, it jumped up and landed magically in the right spot in the parts tray. I don't know, never happened, but that was pretty cool. Ratchet wheel popped right off. We're getting that out of the way. Now we're moving over to the crown wheel and crown wheel core. So this is what allows the movement to wind, or basically the ratchet wheel. So removing both of the screws, now we can move over to the train of wheels bridge, get this bridge out of the way. And as you guys could see, there's a lot of gummed up oil. A lot of these wheels are sticking inside of the pivots. You guys will see it close up. It's just everywhere. I don't know what they dipped it in, but this movement is caked up, and it's not good. That's one of my biggest pet peeves, when a watchmaker just absolutely drenches a watch in oil. In this case, I don't know, it looks like they used actual clock grease, stuff that's not made for wristwatches. But removing all the train of wheels, crown wheel core once again. Now we can move over to the barrel bridge. These screws, once again, I don't know why, but they were extremely tight. They were very hard to break loose. Luckily, these screwdrivers are flatheads. They're milled perfectly for Rolex screws. So now we got those off. We can remove the bridge and then actually pull out our barrel arbor complete unit. Moving over to the pallet fork bridge, remove that screw. Then we can go ahead and remove the actual bridge. Now removing the pallet fork, we're going to inspect all these parts closer later on. But this is what I was talking about. Look at all this grease. This does not look like, Mobius grease, if anything. I mean, it's everywhere in this movement. It's insane. I've never seen this happen. Obviously, it can be dirt mixed with oil, but I mean, it is everywhere, and there's no reason for it. There just genuinely isn't. But we're moving the movement around in the holder, going from bottom side to top side. Now we can remove that hour wheel, and then we could start disassembling the keyless works. Now I'm already expecting the keyless works to be all gummed up, judging by the rest of the movement. But to my surprise, it wasn't that bad. So we're going to remove this cover mechanism here. Now we can remove this wheel followed by the setting wheel. Now we have to remove this little spring. This spring has some tension on it. It likes to fly away. So just make sure that you're cautious when removing one. Always use a piece of Rodico, if anything. You can remove setting levers and stuff like that. Things that go flying. So remove the cannon pinion. Our hour wheel falls right out. Now we can finally remove our setting lever. This is a screwed on setting lever, so we need to fully loosen it for it to drop down. Same with these parts, the winding gears and winding pinions. Now everything's disassembled. We can put it under the microscope, and I was actually wrong. Under the loupe you can't see it, but under a microscope, look at these parts. I don't know what that black goop is. I have no idea, but it could just be mixed oil with dirt. There's no real telling, but everything is sticking to one another. This is a huge reason why this watch was winding so tight. You shouldn't have glue in your movement, all right? Now we're looking at this escape wheel. We actually have a broken tooth. Our pivots look okay, so that's not the worst thing in the world, but one of the teeth has actually sheared off. I don't know how this movement was holding any power when winding it, but somehow it was. Now, turning our attention over to this pallet fork, I didn't see any issues right off the bat until I turned it upside down. Some of the shellac was actually missing out of this pallet fork, causing this entry stone to be loose. Okay, it was pretty much just wiggling around. Now, it's not an impossible fix. You can reutilize some shellac, get it tightened down again. But in this case, I'm not even going to reuse it. So now we're taking a look at this main plate, and once again, all this dried up goop is everywhere. All right, this is the equivalent of glue at this point. All of our cups, all of our cap jewels. I mean, there's just no more oil left. It's completely dried out or it's completely gummed up, and this is what happens. This is why you shouldn't go 20 plus years without a service of your watch. And especially don't bring it to people that don't know what they're doing. The reason this watch broke in the first place was because someone didn't know what they were doing. They messed up and the cap jewel actually fell out of the balance, all right? That caused the balance staff to come completely out of whack, jump the balance guard, and ruin the entire hairspring. That's a very expensive part, ladies and gents. I don't care if it's a vintage watch or a brand new watch. It's a very expensive part. But, I mean, this stuff is just everywhere. I'm not going to complain about it. I got to clean this thing up anyway. But for some reason, someone decided, let me oil up the main plate. Because for some reason, that's where oil needs to be. It's not, all right? So just be cautious, be smart about where you're sending in your watches. If you don't want to wait months and months and months to get your watch back from the factory, go to horologyexchange.com. Send it right in. I'll take care of it, all right? But we're going to take a look at this barrel and mainspring assembly, put it right on my jeweler's cube, and pop the top off. Now, with the top off, I was expecting the worst. And I wouldn't say I was let down, but it was pretty dirty, all right? There was immediately dirt lines on my fingers. I was pulling out the arbor. The arbor looked to be okay, but this mainspring, I think someone had tried to wind it, right? And they used the wrong size winder. It actually broke the end tail, which is pretty much what allows the mainspring to break inside of the barrel, pretty much stop itself. It sheared off. But look at the inside of this barrel. Look at the amount of dirt and caked up, just goop. I could pretty much sign my name in this. So we're going to have to get this thing fully cleaned up before it goes in the machine. I don't need this dirtying up my jars. But even the cap, once again, has a nice layer of film on it. It is what it is. So we're going to use some attack here in a glass jar. And we're going to hand clean a lot of parts before putting it into the cleaning machine. Nice plexi stick and a nice soft bristle brush. And watch all this dirt just fly away. Now notice how it's coming off. It's not just evaporating into the liquid. It's coming off in this stringy, pretty much solid state, which, once again, this is bad oil, bad lubrication. Now, I'm going into each and every pivot with a piece of pegwood. I'm making sure that everything is fully cleaned out to the best of my abilities, and I'm not just relying on the machine to do all the work. In some cases, especially like this, that oil is gone. It's dried up, it's caked up, it's gooped up. You want to make sure that everything is clean before moving on to the next step or the final clean. Now, this was the issue I was just talking about, all right? The person that serviced this watch, you guys actually saw the cap jewel when I first opened up the case back. Notice how the pivot is moving and notice how this hairspring is so breathing, all right? It's completely out of whack. And what happened was this balance shock absorber actually flew out and caused the balance to jump the balance guard. What that ended up causing was it to catch that balance guard, and it absolutely mangled this hairspring. This cannot be reused no matter how much work I do. Even if I bend it back correctly, we're always going to have a bead error. 2 cleaning cycles later, the first one did not get everything off of these parts, so I had to throw it back in. But now we are fully clean. We have a brand new mainspring in our barrel. And now we could go ahead and reassemble the train of wheels. We have our skate wheel in, the seconds wheel, the third wheel, and finally the great wheel. Now these are all clean. I want to make sure that everything is seated properly. These older movements, it's a little bit more tedious, I'm not going to lie. But once you have that bridge on, you can pretty much wiggle everything around, make sure everything is seated within the pivots. And now we have the bridge on, so once again, we can go ahead, wiggle stuff around, and this bridge should just fall right into place. Now, obviously, before putting our screws down, we need to make sure that everything is in its correct home. As you guys can see, checking our free spin, very light touch of that mainspring, and boom. Everything from the great wheel all the way up to the escape wheel is flowing perfectly. Everything is spinning nicely. It's always a good feeling, all right? Now we're going ahead, we're putting back on our barrel bridge, making sure that this is seated properly. Then we can go ahead and start putting down our screws. Now we lay down the crown wheel and crown wheel core, put a little bit of 90-10 in between there, followed by the ratchet wheel. 2 plexi sticks, make sure everything is engaging before putting this screw down. Now we're going, everything's working. Now this is the original pallet fork and the original pallet bridge. I want to test it, see if it was actually working. So tighten all this down, give the watch a little bit of a charge, just so I could go back in and see if this pallet fork is actually engaging. And unfortunately, it was no good. If you watch that seconds wheel in that little window, you'll see it jumping. Now this pallet fork is perfectly in place. It's in the correct pivots. All of our cap jewels are there. But we have a problem with this. It keeps jumping every few teeth. So we're going to have to replace that. So we're spinning back up topside. We're going to start painting our brigade teeth. This is 9504. We just want a little bit of lubrication here, people. You don't want to over lubricate a watch, but you also don't want to under lubricate a watch. So now I'm just getting our crown back in. Then we can put in our setting lever, screw that in, and make sure that that's in place. We're going to need to use our crown to test out our functions. Re-putting in this spring here, this is what gives tension to that setting lever. Once again, 90-10 in between there, you'll watch it actually get sucked up as soon as you start pushing this crown in and out. And immediately, obviously, this watch is now clean, but it feels a lot easier going in and out of this movement. So that's a good thing. Our little setting wheel here, followed by our cannon pinion. We're going to push this back down into place. Don't use the steel tweezers, use a pair of brass ones. Those ones are for dirty work anyway. So now we're just putting back in the rest of the motion works. Now, we're going to go ahead, we're going to test everything, make sure that everything is engaging properly, keep some tension down on this wheel so it doesn't fly out of the way before putting down our cover. Now we're topside, so we can do the last bit of lubrication. HP 1300 on the barrels, 90-10, and we're pretty much good to go. Now I'm also going to add some HP 1300 to this cannon pinion before putting back down our hour wheel. Now, once this is seated, we should double check, make sure that everything's engaging properly before putting down our dial. Now, once again, I cleaned up this dial as much as I could. There's really no saving, those old scratches or oxidization, but I did my best. So we're tightening back down onto the main plate here. Always want to keep pressure on there, make sure that the feet don't jump out. But, overall, it's not that bad. It really isn't. This is just what happens to an older watch. You're going to have some oxidization. Some of the polished bits, like the markers, the crown cornet up at 12 o'clock, it's not going to be able to be cleaned up. There's just no way around it. And we're obviously not putting a brand new dial in this watch. So we did our best, and that's realistically all that we could do. Now, people ask, how do I clean up markers? You could go in there and polish them by hand by actually utilizing a car polish. You do the same thing for the dial. You want to try it, be my guest. But you have to be careful, especially with vintage watches. All the literature, all the markings, they can be wiped away very easily. So here I'm basically going in dry and cleaning all this stuff off. Now, the same thing for the hands. Usually I would actually go in there with a polish and polish these hands up. However, this is the original loom. There's a lot of oxidization, there's a lot of pitting, so I'm just going to wipe them dry. No lubrication, no nothing, just a basically clean cloth, wipe on them nice and smooth, and look at that. They look a lot cleaner, it looks better, so now we can go ahead and start putting these onto the movement. Of course, using our wood tweezers, once again, very light pressure. We want to make sure that this thing is centered perfectly at 12 o'clock. Although there is no date complication here, we still want to make sure that our hands are set perfectly. Now, they're both perfectly facing at the 12 o'clock cornet. Finally, we could secure them to the movement, and now we could test. The hands are moving, they're not touching, they're not scraping any of the markers, so we're pretty much good to go there, and finally let down our seconds hand. Once again, I cleaned these hands up the best that I could. But guys, 60 years old. This watch looks fantastic. This is exactly how your watch will look in 60 years. Now, this was the last part. I thought I was going to be done, and I was pretty much ready to be done with this watch. I was ready to send it off. A brand new mainspring, brand new hairspring, brand new balance staff. Why do we need that? Well, let's take a look at the original one. Once again, I know some people are going to be like, oh, you could just bend them back with special tweezers, this, and that. No, you can't. There's too many kinks. There's too many bends. Look at how this hairspring looks, all right? It's going underneath different lines. Like, there's just nothing you could do here. Once again, it might look good from the top side, but once again, people, looks can be deceiving. And this is why I want to show you guys this type of stuff. Because a lot of watchmakers, when they relay this stuff to a client, they just think that people are lying or making stuff up. There's nothing I can do with this hairspring here. All right, I don't care how good of a watchmaker you are. You cannot bend this thing back and have it running as it should have when it left the factory. There's just no way. I'm sorry. Now, luckily, my client understood this and he gave me the go-ahead, but we ran into another issue. This is a 1560 movement. Now, we could not get a brand new balance and hairspring. It was nowhere to be found. All right, I asked everyone I know at Rolex. They could not provide one. So we pretty much had no other option but to go ahead and replace some parts. Now, what did we replace? All right, we replaced obviously our balance and hairspring, a new escape wheel, a new pallet fork, and then we actually had to change some of the train of wheels. Now, why do we do that? Because the 1560 runs on a different frequency, so you can't just slap a 1570 balance in it and call it a day. Why? Once again, different frequencies, different vibrations. It would look like it's running good on a time grapher. However, the hands would be hours apart. So we had to go ahead and upgrade to a 1570 balance. But now what does that allow me to do? I have to put in a new bridge. We have to change out some of the escapement parts. All this just so we can get this watch running again. And thank God, this thing started right up once we changed out the parts. It's running beautifully the first time grapher. I couldn't believe it. I said, wow, this thing is actually running phenomenally. Very little adjustments had to be done, but overall, this watch is now running, and I couldn't be happier. But we're not out of the woods just yet, right? So we're going to blow off this dial here, blow out the underside of our crystal, and then we can finally reinsert this movement back into the original mid case. Now, guys, once again, we did not do any type of polish work on here. Every scratch tells us a story, and with sentimental value behind this watch, I don't want to remove any of that history. So now we finally have the movement back in the mid case. So I took out the brittles in order to work on this watch. So we're going to move the movement over. This will allow me to put back in these brittle screws, tighten each one of them down so that we can finally secure this movement within the mid case. Now, once again, don't worry about the case. I put it in the ultrasonic cleaner, but I'm still going to have to do some cleaning work by hand, such as on the crown tube. I mean, underneath the lugs in between the case, you know, there's a ton of pitting in this watch already, especially in this mid case, especially in this case back area. I don't think this watch will ever be waterproof again. I'm going to test it regardless, but I don't think it will work. There's just, you know, some things you don't want to chance, all right? So a real water test, I don't think it's worth it. So we're going to have to throw it in the machine and just see if anything passes. But something this old, I just wouldn't even chance it. Now, we're going to reinsert our crown here. Once again, fresh lubrication, fresh silicone grease. I'm going to throw it back on the time grapher. Now, this was before regulation. But I mean, right off the bat, this was not a full wind, plus 7 seconds, no beater, 243 degrees of amplitude. I mean, come on, a 60-year-old watch? Pfft, beats me. This thing's running phenomenal. Now we have that 1570 balance on it, that 1570 balance wheel. And I mean, there's just not much more I could ask for. I got to rebuild the automatic works, and we're pretty much in the home stretch now. HP 1300 on that oscillating weight pivot. And then we could go ahead and put back in what I like to call the Jesus clip. Because when you lose it, you'll do nothing but curse and take the Lord's name in vain. All right, so luckily this one popped right in. Setting wheel goes in, and then we could finally reinstall our reversing wheels. Now these cleaned up beautifully. They were so caked up with dirt, I couldn't believe it. That's pretty much why this watch wasn't winding at all. But we're going ahead, we're putting back down our bottom side cover, making sure everything is perfectly within line in those pivots, and then we can tighten down these screws. Now, when you're tightening these down, don't tighten them all the way. You need to make sure that your wheels are engaging. But luckily, we hit it first try. So now we're putting back in our blued screws for the automatic module. And once again, when tightening down this automatic module, always check. Make sure that all the reversing wheels are engaging. And we're doing our last bit of lubrication, 9010, HP 1300. Just the common stuff, but take a look at this movement. It cleaned up beautifully. Our rotor is now freely spinning, which is great. This thing was banging around before on the movement, and it was barely moving to begin with. But we have it nice. Everything's moving. It's winding beautifully. It sounds phenomenal when you wind it, and it feels super crisp. But look at that. That's how you want your rotor to spin around. It's crazy that I'm so excited about that. But this case back, this was the vein of my existence, all right? I put this thing in the ultrasonic cleaner for well over an hour. This gasket did not want to come off. There was nothing I could do to it. I just don't know. I have no idea what to do here. I was going to hit it with a torch and melt it off, but finally I left it sitting in boiling water for probably another hour and then scraped off any remnants with a razor blade. Now, once again, you guys can see all of the pitting, right? Now, this can't be fixed without a lot of laser welding and a lot of lathe work. That all translates to a lot of money. Now, the client understood this. This is just not something we want to throw money at, right? So we're basically just getting this thing up and running, letting it live out its legacy within the family for another 60, 100 years, right? It's just one of those things. You have to determine whether it's actually worth the money. And unfortunately, in this case, it's not really worth that money. Obviously, getting it running, beautiful. That's what we want to do here. So fresh case back gasket, fresh grease, and then we can finally tighten this case back gasket down. And now we can admire the work and our reference 1007. Now, I hate to say it, but I actually lost the remainder of these clips when this watch was fully cleaned up. I sincerely apologize, but guys, thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Head over to the website if you're looking to buy, sell, or trade. If you want any work done on your watches, feel free to reach right out to me. I have a ton of new videos coming out this following week, so I'll catch you on the next one.